So welcome all of our listeners to the InFAWmation Nation, brought to you by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, Division of Fish and Wildlife Hunter Education Program. I'd like to introduce our cast members. I'm your host, Scott Travers, the Hunter Education Coordinator for the state. With me, I have our production manager, Branton Ellerman, and our editing manager, Dana Kopek. And as always, our focus is on hunting, hunter education, fishing and aquatic education, and all things wildlife outreach related in the state of Rhode Island. In this episode, we'll be talking with the Rhode Island Division of Fish and Wildlife's Wildlife Outreach Coordinator, Mary Gannon. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
And it's great to have you. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a Rhode Islander. I was born here. I grew up in Johnston, Rhode Island, in the suburbs. So I did not grow up in an intrepid, outdoorsy family. I would say, I hope I don't offend my family by saying this. I don't think they'll feel bad, but we did not camp. We did not fish or hunt, but we were always outside. So we always had gardens. There was an empty lot next to my parents' house that was just an acre lot, wood lot, and I would beg my dad, please take me on an adventure in the lot next door. So I always had that spark for wildlife and for nature, and that led me towards a career in teaching people about wildlife in Rhode Island.
So Mary, how do you become a wildlife outreach coordinator?
That is something that I am still trying to figure out. How did I get here? Because it's a very unique position. It's something that's really fun, and I do something different every single day. So my background is in wildlife biology. My undergrad degree is from URI. And after I graduated URI, I worked as a seasonal for the division doing habitat work. And I really loved working for a state agency. And I was like, this is really awesome. And I enjoyed the fact that we interact with the public and we manage land and game populations. And it was just really awesome to see how we could manage wildlife sustainably for the future. And I liked that doing aspect of wildlife biology. But I ended up by going the education route because I found out that I loved telling people about it more, I guess maybe more than doing it, because it was really cool to get in there and do the field work. But I just could not stop telling my friends and family about what I was doing and all the cool things that were going on at the division. So I decided to pursue my master's in teaching. So I graduated from Brown in 2017 and seriously thought I was just going to go teach in a classroom like high school biology or environmental science. And this job came up. So I applied because I really loved working for the division. I was super excited that they were hiring and I got the job. So it was really awesome that I could use both of my degrees every single day, and they're both integrated. And I feel like that's a miracle unto itself. Nowadays, people go to college and they study something and they don't actually get to use it. I'm super grateful that I get to do that and enjoy what I do.
That's awesome. I know you're right on top of all these things and you're super energetic about all your programs. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about the different kinds of programs that you do?
Yeah, so the Wildlife Outreach Program is pretty diverse. So the whole point of the program is to spread awareness of Rhode Island's wildlife species, the conservation work that's going on in the state, and that's some past conservation projects, current and upcoming projects, how hunting and trapping play a role in conservation, because a lot of people don't know this. I mean, I know you all know this, working in Hunter Ed, but the general public really doesn't understand how that works. I've kind of found out. So just talking about the Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration Act, how that excise tax money is converted into conservation funding for the states. That is, I find a really interesting topic for a lot of people, because people just don't realize that's a thing. So spreading that word, and then telling people how they can get involved. So we cover a lot of information in our programs, but we try to do it in a lot of different creative ways. So currently we're working on some new wildlife curriculum kits called the Roadie Critter Kits. And that stemmed from, we were doing school programs in the classroom, about an hour long program with kids. And it was really, really awesome. I loved it. And I miss it now because of the pandemic. But it just became so popular that we couldn't keep up, because it's just myself and Gabby DeMalon, who assists with the Wildlife Outreach Program and the volunteer program. So it's really just like 1.5 people doing the school program. So we said, oh gosh, what do we do? It's getting popular. We don't want to abandon teachers and students, because that's an awesome group to reach out to, kids especially. So we decided to make curriculum kits to replace those in-person programs so that we could in turn train the teachers in that curriculum and in those concepts that we would cover in the programs, train the teachers so they feel comfortable with it, and then they can take it to their classrooms and work with them over an extended period of time as opposed to just an hour. Then they could really extend it into a unit or maybe work on it for a week, whatever they wanted to do with it. And we figured that might be more valuable than just running in and saying, oh, look at all this awesome stuff about wildlife and then running away. We really want the information to sink in, and hopefully, the kids are our future conservationists and our future hunters and anglers. So hopefully that will instill that sense of interest and that sense of responsibility for our natural resources. So that's a huge part of what we've been doing during the pandemic. Right now, we're working on revamping our field trip program, again, focusing on kids. We got kind of derailed because of COVID, but we're trying to come up with some bigger and better things once this is all over. And some of my favorite stuff that we do are our public programs. So right now, they're virtual. It's not the same, but we're able to reach a lot of people this way. And the regular times outside of the pandemic, we do seasonal outdoor programs for families or for anybody who would like to join us, and we do them on a variety of different topics.
So what are some of these seasonal outdoor family programs that you have, and what are some examples of these programs that you run throughout the year?
We start in the winter with Come Birding With Me, which sounds really silly to start in the winter. We're looking at sea ducks. So usually I run those January, February. Then we move into March and April with Vernal Pool Night, where we go out and look for frogs and salamanders at night, so you're listening to the peepers and the wood frogs in the vernal pools, and it's a really fun experience to get out in the woods at night, I think, because a lot of people have never done that. Skydance Night is another one that we run in April that is observing the American woodcock, aka the timberdoodle, one of my favorite birds, super cool little game bird that does a sky dance in the spring where it spirals up into the air and it spirals back down and lands in an open field, and it makes a very fun peent noise. So they're very easy to observe, especially if you've never gone bird watching before. It's a great way to kind of connect and talk about not just the bird itself, but about hunting and how that plays a role in the habitat restoration for this bird, and how the habitat restoration for this one species creates habitat for over 40 species of songbirds. So it's what we call an umbrella species. So that program I find is very eye-opening for a lot of people, and how much stuff that we touch when we think about just managing habitat for one little grapefruit-sized bird. So one of my favorite programs. And then in the summer, we do a summer bat night where we sit out at the Carolina Trout Hatchery, and we encourage folks to bring their lawn chairs, bring a snack, and we do a little bat program, and we watch the bats fly out of their maternity roost, and we do a bat count. We have a little contest, and the winner goes home with the bat box, usually created by Charlie Brown, our fur bearer and bat biologist. So that one's a lot of fun. And we've also done a herp hunt, so looking for reptiles and amphibians in the early summer. And typically our herpetologist, Scott Buchanan, will come along for that program and offer his expertise, and it's a lot of fun.
Do you have any programs for the fall?
Yeah, so that gets a little tricky because fall is hunting season. So we try not to, really get into the management areas because most of these are held at management areas to showcase state land as well. So we try to not bring the big groups into the management areas during the hunting season, because the hunters wait all year to get out there in September, October. They're raring to go, and it's just not fair, I think, to have 30 people traipse by and talking about, whatever it might be. But we're always open to doing some sort of fall program. But we tried doing a habitat hike, and I think we'd like to revisit that just to showcase different state lands and talk about habitat management. But the fall seems to be a busy time for people, so we're trying to rethink how we want to do the fall.
Yeah, and habitat management is so important, so it'd be a great idea to get the word out about, more information about that. So since we're in winter now, let's talk a little bit about that Come Birding program that you have. And you do that at Beavertail, correct?
Yeah, we do it at Beavertail. I'm looking into doing it at some other locations across the state, because Beavertail is we're such Rhode Islanders. It's such a hike to get to Beavertail for some people. So I'm looking to do another location, maybe in the Upper Bay, to get the Providence area folks and give them something more accessible. But when we do it at Beavertail, we have people come out and we meet in the parking lot. And last year we actually started the program in the museum, in the lighthouse. State Parks was kind enough to open up the museum so everybody could sit down and look at the stuff in the museum, learn a little bit about the birds before we went out to watch them and to learn how to identify them. So we share information about some sea duck conservation, just about the division in general. We do a little trivia. So it's a lot of fun just to get people interested in these birds that are only here for a season. Really, they're only here for the winter, maybe early spring, and then they're off to Canada.
When we say Beavertail, we of course mean Beavertail State Park.
Correct.
And did you want to tell our listeners where that is within the state?
Yeah, so that's in Jamestown, and Beavertail is at the southern tip of Jamestown.
What else can people expect to experience when they attend that Come Birding With Me program?
I would say expect to be cold. So wear your layers, dress like an onion. I every single time I run this program, I tell people in emails multiple times before they come, make sure you dress warmly. And there's always somebody inevitably who is cold. So that was great to be able to start in the museum this past year, because we were able to let people warm up a little bit and then go out and they could hop in their car if they were too cold. So definitely dress warmly. It's always windy at Beavertail. We provide binoculars for everybody. You're welcome to bring your own, but we understand that not everybody can provide their own binoculars. So we have some really nice pairs of binoculars available. We have some little field guides that folks can use. I have everything from a full-on Peterson field guide that you can flip through, or you can use our cheat sheets, what we call them cheat sheets. That's a laminated card with all of the sea ducks that you might see at Beavertail. And the birds are pretty easy to distinguish and to view. So you can just stand in the parking lot at Beavertail. We don't have to do a heavy hike to get to see the birds. They're right out there on the water, and they're easily identifiable from each other. So a common eider looks very different than a white-winged scoter. So if you're a new bird watcher, I highly recommend this because it's simple to see the birds. They're fairly easy to identify, so you'll feel accomplished when you leave. Like, you won't feel overwhelmed with all the information. Because if you go birding, if you come birding with us maybe in the springtime, when we do some forest species, or we'll go to the Great Swamp and we'll look at wetland and forest and young forest, that can get overwhelming very quickly because there's so many different types of birds, and sometimes they're little, and the distinguishing characteristic isn't that obvious. So you might feel a little frustrated, or the bird flew away, I can't see it. So you don't have that problem at Beavertail because the birds are just floating in front of you. They are sitting ducks, so to speak.
I love the humor. And not only are there different markings for different species of the birds, the males and females can also look different. Isn't that correct?
Correct, yeah. So they're ducks, for the most part, the males are more colorful than the females. So for the example of the common eider, they have that beautiful black and white. It's really crisp looking. They've got some yellow. They've got some green and blue on their face. If you look really closely, the females are just brown. So they have lots of variations of brown, but they're pretty drab. And the reason for that is because the females, when they're up on their breeding grounds, way up in northern Canada, they're ground nesting birds. So they have to be able to hide from predators and remain very cryptic on the nest. So that's the reason for their drab coloring. It's not because they want to be boring. It's just it's necessary for survival.
In general terms, what is a sea duck?
Yeah, so sea ducks, one of my favorite groups of birds. I get super excited to talk about them, so forgive me if I if I get really excited and ramble on. But sea ducks are a diving duck. So we have two different types of ducks, right? So your diving ducks are the ones that actively jump up and dive down into the water, and they sink and they'll swim through the water. Something like a dabbling duck just sticks its tail up into the air, the little feet are up, and they're in shallow water. Something like a mallard, teal, things that we are used to seeing, in parks and freshwater ponds. That's a dabbling duck because it's a shallower body of water that they're foraging in. Sea ducks spend a good chunk of their time on salt water, and they're diving ducks. Now, not all diving ducks are sea ducks. So something like a hooded merganser that you'll see in a freshwater body of water, that's not a sea duck, right? But they are divers. The sea ducks are the ones that spend most of their time, the migration period, staging periods, wintering periods, they'll spend that on salt water. And they may breed in freshwater habitats, so a lot of them breed way up in the boreal forest along lakes, but they're spending their winter on the coast. So when they dive down into that water along the coast, they're searching for mussels, for crabs, for aquatic vegetation. And one of the coolest things about them is they swallow the mussels whole, because ducks and birds, they don't have teeth. So what are you going to do with the mussel? If you're floating out in open water, gulp, you just gulp it down, and their stomach is strong enough that it crushes the shells, and they can digest it, which is pretty awesome. So there's some really interesting adaptations. So some of our sea ducks that I think of, I've mentioned eider and scoter. The long-tailed duck is another very popular one. The harlequin, my favorite duck of all time. And when they dive, they are typically going down 10 feet. Maybe they're under the water for maybe 30 seconds tops. Some of them will go up to 65 feet deep, and then the long-tailed duck has been observed in 200 feet of water. So they're very impressive in the way that they can make themselves sink, because birds are very buoyant, so they compress all of the air out of their feathers. Kind of like, I think of it like a Ziploc bag, like if you're squeezing the air out of a Ziploc bag. And that's what they do to their bodies. They just compress all those feathers, they sink down, and then when they're underwater, their metabolism responds, so they have reduced oxygen use underwater. So their body rations the oxygen only to their nervous system, and their heart slows down so that they're able to hold their breath and to really just slow down as they go down into the water to feed. And then when they're done feeding, they just expand those feathers again, let the air back in, and they go pop right up to the surface like a cork. So it's pretty awesome that they're able to do that in frigid water. I mean, I always say to the folks who come, like, can you imagine going swimming right now? Do the polar plunge right now at Beavertail? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, so, especially down to that depth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, imagine how cold it is like down there. But the ducks, I mean, they have no feathers on their feet. They have a specific, and all waterfowl do this, they have a countercurrent heating system. So the blood that's coming from the core of their body that's warmed up by the core passes very closely to the blood that's coming back from their extremities. So that blood is always constantly being sort of warmed. So they're not getting as cold. So that's how they're able to not get frostbite on those little webbed toes that are completely exposed to the elements. And I'm like, oh no, my mitten is not correctly on my hand. My hand's freezing. Like, I can't move my fingers. Like, and they're in the water, no sweat.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. I had no idea that they dove down so far. So it sounds like there are a lot of reasons people will be excited to learn about sea ducks because they're so amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. They're, not only are they exciting to look at, if you're just a bird watcher, but they are a game species, so they're managed as a game species. There are definitely some conservation challenges for sea ducks. Just their life history makes them a little more susceptible to conservation challenges. So they have a high site fidelity. So the birds that are here in the bay in the winter are likely the same birds that were here in the bay last year. And then wherever they go to breed, they go to the same breeding spot every year. So that can be tricky if you're faithful to a site and you're not as willing to colonize another area or shift where you like to go. Say the Narragansett Bay all of a sudden just disappears. Now where are those birds going to go? They're slow to colonize a new area. They only lay about 4 to 6 eggs per clutch, as opposed to something like a wood duck, which when they check the wood duck boxes, when our seasonals go out, and I'm sure Jenny talked about this a little bit when she came on the podcast, but they'll check the boxes and there's like a dozen eggs in there or more. They can lay a lot of eggs, so their reproductive rates are higher. 4 to 6 eggs is really tiny, and ducklings, like, you're very susceptible if you're a duckling to predation, to just general mortality. So just having that small clutch size is kind of hard. They can live a long time. They live 12 to 15 years in some cases. That's a very long life for a bird, but it takes them about 3 years to reach sexual maturity. So if you're slow to mature, you have a small clutch size, you're very site faithful, that's setting up challenges for these species. So there's been a lot of work that's been done across the Atlantic Flyway to study these birds. It's very difficult to study them on the breeding grounds because it's so remote. So people have trouble getting up there, but on the wintering grounds, they've been able to tag the birds. They put transmitters on them and track them to see where they're breeding. And that's given people across the Flyway some ideas as to, like, oh, we didn't even know that the birds were breeding in this spot because we didn't see them there. Or they do like aerial surveys up in Canada, completely missed them. So that technology is really helping to give us a lot of information about these birds. And here in Rhode Island, we contribute to regional research. So they do the midwinter bay survey. So Jenny goes up in the helicopter and flies around and somehow counts the birds. I don't know how they do it. It's like amazing. I remember being in college and they're like, okay, flock of geese flying by fairly slowly. Try to get a count. And I'm like, I don't know how many birds are up there. So I can only imagine how hard it is to do it in a helicopter. But there are techniques on how to do it. So we contribute to that monitoring research. There's been partnerships with URI graduate students over the years, tracking birds up in Quebec that come down to the bay. And there's a really cool study that was done by a URI postdoc that crunched all the data from a bunch of all these studies from across the Flyway. And essentially what the study did was it looked at, like, how much time are the birds actually spending on the breeding grounds? How much time are they spending staging the migration in the spring and the fall? And how much time are they spending in the winter? And it seems that based on that information of all those transmitters flying around, they're really looking at 5 species. So common eider, the long-tailed duck, the surf scoter, the white-winged scoter, and the black scoter. These are 5 species of conservation concern. Looking at the data from all of those birds, they're seeing that they spend a ton of time staging and a ton of time in the winter. Their time on the breeding grounds is really, really small. So that means for us here in Rhode Island, that means that the Narragansett Bay is very critical to these birds. So it's not just like, oh yeah, they're here for the winter or whatever, but it's very, very critical to their survival because they spend so much time here. So that's pretty cool that Rhode Island, little tiny Rhode Island and the little Narragansett Bay is like critical for the Atlantic flyway for multiple species. I like to brag about that. Like, Rhode Island's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's great to know that our
sea
little
duck.
state plays such a big role.
Yeah.
So will you talk about the Atlantic Flyway, and can you describe that flyway and its ranges for our listeners?
Right. So so if you listen to Jenny in previous episodes, I encourage everybody to take a listen to learn more in depth about waterfowl with our game bird biologist, Jenny Kilburn. But essentially the Atlantic Flyway is the Atlantic coast, right? So where the birds are, I think of them like highways. So the highway that the birds along the Atlantic coast, that's all the way up in Canada down to the Gulf, where the birds are going to be migrating and moving in that Atlantic Flyway. So all the Atlantic states, essentially.
It sounds like there's been a lot of research on sea ducks in Rhode Island. And what are some of the findings of that research?
Yeah, so one of the really cool things that we talk about in the program is, because at Beavertail, if you look on a clear day, you can kind of just see the Block Island wind farm. And before they put that wind farm in, there was an extensive study done on the birds and seeing where are they going within the bay so that when they placed that wind farm, it wouldn't negatively impact the birds. So they found that the birds really weren't using that area where they had proposed to put the turbines. And the birds seem to kind of avoid it. If they do come into contact, they're pretty low flying as opposed to some other migratory birds. So they were able to put the wind farm in safely without affecting our sea ducks. And I think that'll be important for the future, especially as, we look towards green energy moving forward. Where are we going to put our wind farms, offshore wind, thinking about where those birds are going to be. And I always stress this to folks when we talk about it, it's so important, to make advances in conservation and thinking about the big picture, but we can't make a stride in one direction and say, oh, awesome, it's green, it's eco-friendly, but then have detrimental effects for our wildlife. So it's all this whole picture that we got to look at and think about all the moving pieces before we place something new on the landscape. So that's, we think about coastal development, how that's affected our wildlife. If you go in Rhode Island, anywhere in Rhode Island, you look around, you're going, well, there's a house there, there's a house there, there's a house there. So much of our coastline has been developed. There's very little bit left that is fairly undeveloped. So if we have to think about, how far are we going to expand our development? And that's a form of development. Thinking about that and weighing those pros and cons. So it's exciting because it's really interesting how you can affect things positively or negatively, hopefully positively, by just carefully plotting out and looking at the science and making those decisions based on science.
Right, absolutely. Habitat is so important.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I say it like nonstop.
Yeah, I know. And that's cool. So how can people find out more information about upcoming events and other info on your programs?
Absolutely. You can visit the Wildlife Outreach Program page. So it's just dem.ri.gov/wildlife outreach. And we have all of our upcoming events are in like a little scrolling calendar towards the bottom of the page. We've got information for our roadie critter kits. You can view all of the materials online. They're accessible for free. We also have our kids magazine, Wild Rhode Island Explorer, available online. And also you can send me an email with your address and I can mail you a copy, a hard copy in the mailbox every time we issue an issue. So that's quarterly. We also have it available in Spanish, which is super exciting. So if you know anyone, any teachers who are interested in this for their classrooms, we're happy to send out classroom packs as well with both English and Spanish copies.
How do people sign up for your events?
It's pretty easy. So on the website, we have on the calendar, you can click on an event and it's just a simple registration form online. All of our programs are free, which is awesome. So we encourage you to sign up and come join us. You can also find out about the programs if you're following our Facebook page, our Instagram account, and of course, this podcast.
Indeed. So Mary, I have a really, really difficult question for you.
Okay.
I know you love your job and everything you do, but we had a question come in and it's, what is your favorite program to teach out of all the things that you do?
Oh my gosh.
You got to pick one.
This is so hard.
You can't say all of them.
Okay. I would probably say I think it's the Skydance night. Honestly, of all because it combines all of the things that I love. I love habitat. I love birds. I love talking about like how things interconnect. But to watch people who have maybe never even heard of the American woodcock before, to sit there and then the bird flies right in and lands and they're like, oh, there it is. And then it starts to peet, peet, peet. And you can hear them all around the field. And then you see them twirl up into the air and their little wings make a twittering noise when they fly. When you look at people's faces when they first experience that, it is so awesome because like you can't, I'm like, look at this huge smile on my face right now talking about it because you just cannot not smile when you listen to these birds. And I love seeing people go, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is. So that one's my favorite.
And I'm going to hopefully look forward to experiencing that myself this year.
Yes, please come.
So, absolutely. Cool. So Mary, one thing I'd like to ask you is, do you have one particular funny story from the field that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh my gosh. We have so many funny stories, but one of my favorites, Gabby DeMelon and I were out with a class of third graders up in Cumberland. And luckily their school is just a walking distance away from the monastery park in Cumberland, which is a beautiful park, lots of trees and beautiful trails, and it's the perfect spot to do a bird program. So we had the kids come down from the school. We did our talking portion of the program. We gave everybody binoculars. We went out. We looked at birds. And while we're there, we're walking along a little trail, and the kids are looking around. We stop and we look, and one kid goes, oh, Miss Mary, a duck. And I'm going, we're in the middle of the woods. Like, and kids will say this all the time, like, I saw Bigfoot. I saw a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And they'll just say stuff. So I'm like, oh, yeah, a duck. What? Then all of a sudden, all the other kids are going, there's a duck. There's a duck. And I'm going, really? Come on. And I look, and there is a mother wood duck on the trail. And all of a sudden, it starts raining ducklings. And all these little ducklings are flying out of their nest cavity up in a tree. This tree was like, it was so tall where the nest cavity was. And this is like the stuff of nature documentaries, right? And the little ducklings are flying down and plop, plop, plop onto the forest floor. And then the ducklings all turn and storm the class. So there's like an invasion of ducklings running, like beep, 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 running towards the students. And the kids are all like, ah, like freaking out because there's a duckling underfoot. So I'm going, everybody, and this, when things happen in slow motion, when you're like, oh my gosh, this took 10 minutes. It literally only happened in a span of like maybe 30 seconds. But Gabby shouted, everybody freeze! And so all the kids stop, and the ducklings are all literally, there was a duckling like on my foot. They were just like running all over the place. And we were probably 50 feet away from them. And they all just ran towards us like this little army. And then the mother made her little noises, her little squeaking noises, and the little babies looked up, and they all followed her into the stream. And then we didn't see them for the rest of the program, but we all had the kids crouched down. We're all on the ground, like looking at the ducks. Everybody's got their binoculars. And to this day, I still can't believe I saw it. It was like the most amazing thing ever.
See, that's the most amazing thing about nature is that you never know what you're going to see.
I know. I'm thinking, we'll see a blue jay. We'll see a chickadee. Nope. Like it was raining ducklings, and then we were invaded by the ducklings.
Excellent. That's probably one of our best stories ever. Alrighty, well, fantastic. Is there anything else that you want to mention or bring up or comment on before we close for this particular episode?
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me and letting me talk about sea ducks with great excitement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming and spending a little bit of time with us and our listeners. Just like to do our introduction for our next episode, and we're going to be interviewing Hugh Markey, who's a journalist, teacher, and naturalist in Rhode Island who's participated in documenting many of the fish and wildlife programs that we've done for the state. We'll also have more questions from our listeners, and if you have a question for any of our guests or any of our staff, please email me at scott.travers@dem.ri.gov. Again, from the Department of Environmental Management, Division of Fish and Wildlife Hunter Education Program, this has been Scott Travers, and I'd like to thank you all for listening to our podcast. Spread the word, and we'll see you next month.